What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode?
Langston Hughes' Dream Deferred muses on what becomes of a dream after it dies. I'm often reminded of this poem when I revisit Cowboy Bebop. The question, what happens to a dream deferred, and by extension, what becomes of its dreamer, is especially useful in meditating on the series, as this is its central quiet refrain. Across its 26 episodes, Cowboy Bebop returns to this rumination. What happens when our dreams are put on hold? When our trajectories are derailed? Our plans subverted? Or a future we strove for is denied us? Every major character in Bebop is living after their defining moment. Spike has already been violently separated from his past life. Jet has already lost his partner, his arm, and his idealism. Faye has woken to the realization that the future arrived without her. Ed carries the imprint of abandonment long before she joins the crew. Even Ein, who has escaped his lab-designed purpose, navigates a world where his intelligence has no assigned function. This creates a unique narrative space. The core cast are not striving toward a dream, they're suspended in the wake of one. Adrift, weightless, caught somewhere between motion and paralysis. Their career as bounty hunters is necessity and inertia, not purpose. Deep down, the crew linger in a half-light, simultaneously fleeing from and drifting toward the unresolved truth at the center of their lives. As we watch them bounce from job to job, station to station, and planet to planet, it becomes clear that the true story of the series isn't about adventure or bounty hunting. It's about characters who can't quite wake up from a dream that ended, trying to navigate the empty space left behind. Across the series, each character is quietly working toward the same unspoken question. What comes next? What happens to me now? Now that there is no going back? Now that the life I thought I was meant to live has evaporated? Now that the dream is over? Cowboy Bebop rarely asks its central thesis outright, but every encounter the characters face is orbiting around it. And these interactions are fertile ground for a deeper investigation. To understand Cowboy Bebop, we first need to reconcile how it tells its story. Though the series adopts an episodic format, using a bounty of the week conceit, it quickly strays from conventional narrative expectations. The result can feel unfocused, disconnected, or meandering to viewers accustomed to linear plotting. There is no clear inciting incident, and no explicit central thrust driving toward a predetermined ending. For some, this has led to the understandable but reductive critique that the show is plotless. However, this undersells what Bebop achieves. While it strays from traditional serialized structure, it absolutely possesses a story, just not one that unfolds in a straight line. Cowboy Bebop leverages a storytelling structure referred to as Centripetal Narrative. If that's a new concept for you, it's best to think of it like this. Aristotelian storytelling, derived from Aristotle's Poetics, treats plot as a causal chain. Each event follows the previous with logical necessity. Cause A produces effect B, which necessitates event C, escalating toward resolution. This framework prioritizes the what and the how, the mechanics of conflict, and the closure of narrative debt. The story is a path leading to a fixed destination. Centripetal narrative, by contrast, abandons the line in favor of the orbit. In physics, centripetal force is what keeps an object moving on a curved path, pulling it constantly toward a center. In Bebop, the narrative is not framed as a strict sequence of causes, but as the pull of a gravitational field, where meaning accumulates through recurrence. It prioritizes what scholars call effective resonance, how a story feels rather than just what happens. Here, the narrative is not a path forward, but a space to be inhabited. Meaning emerges not from reaching an endpoint, but from the resonant echoes between seemingly disconnected moments. This is not a narrative of linear progress, it's a narrative of presence, where atmosphere and internal state carry more weight than external plot movement. Now, a very, very few among you may note a resemblance between centripetal narrative and the post-structuralist concept of the rhizome, a narrative convention without fixed origin or ending, where story connections branch laterally without hierarchy. But there's a key difference. If Aristotelian storytelling resembles a ladder, a central object with rungs to travel in predictable sequence, rhizomatic narrative resembles a net, a sprawling assemblage where any node can connect to any other, with no privileged entry point or center of gravity. Bebop, however, does not embrace rhizomatic freedom. Unlike Watanabe's other production, Space Dandy, where structure itself becomes a sandbox for disconnected vignettes without concern for continuity or contiguity, Bebop maintains a gravitational pull toward an emotional center. The series is structured in a way to explore side avenues with liberty, but always within the orbit of core themes. Instead of a net, Bebop functions more like a spirograph, a series of loops within loops, where order matters not through chronology, but through relation to the center. Each rotation traces a new path, while remaining physically bound to the same unresolved wounds. Where rhizomatic storytelling invites us to wander freely, Bebop keeps pulling us back to the same emotional gravity well. To understand how centripetal logic functions in practice, we can identify 4 structural patterns that replace traditional linear plotting. The first is recursion. In Aristotelian storytelling, when a character resolves a problem, the narrative advances. In Bebop, the narrative is recursive. It circles the same trauma from different altitudes and angles. We return to identical motifs, not to progress the plot, but to show how the gravity of the past slowly pulls characters toward its center. The next is relation. Meaning emerges through resonance. Characters don't simply act, they reflect and distort one another. The crew encounters individuals who mirror aspects of themselves, typically at moments of collapse. Like celestial bodies in a system, their identities are defined by the space between them, not by isolated arcs. Next, we have topology. Emotional distance replaces chronological time. An event from 10 years ago often feels more present than the current bounty. Episodes are better sequenced by thematic proximity. Speak Like a Child and Hard Luck Woman sit side by side, not because of timeline adjacency, but because both orbit the ache of a lost home. Finally is iteration. This is where weight accumulates. Each session is a variation on a theme. A riff on loss, deferral, or reinvention, among others. These are not standalone adventures. They're loops that add mass to the central tragedy. By the finale, we are not merely watching a conclusion. We're feeling the cumulative gravity of every prior rotation. In short, Bebop is better understood as a network of effective and thematic relationships than as a purely linear plot. Instead of building momentum through escalating events, it builds meaning through repetition, variation, and contrast. Each session stands alone, yet provides a mirror into the crew's internal struggles. The loose anthology format grants freedom to shift tone, from noir to slapstick to tragedy to surreal nightmare. But these shifts are not random. They function as different lenses pointed at the same lingering pain. One episode interrogates Spike's fatalism. Another exposes Jet's buried resentment. Another peels away Faye's splintered identity. And another explores Ed's desire for belonging. Piece by piece, the show reveals who these people truly are, by forcing them into encounters that echo their own avoided truths. There is no traditional central plot, but there is a central pressure, the past. Every character runs from it, is haunted by it, or orbits it endlessly. And Bebop uses an episodic format to approach that pressure from every possible angle. Instead of one continuous storyline, we receive a constellation of smaller stories, each hitting a different facet of the same core question. The result is not narrative absence, it's narrative distillation. From here, the series' true engine becomes clear. Thematic accumulation, the repeated exploration of motifs, encounters, and dilemmas that deepen our understanding, not through revelation, but through resonance. All of this is admittedly a little heady. So in need of a better conceptual analog, especially in regards to the concept of thematic accumulation, maybe the most appropriate way of examining this type of storytelling for our purposes is through the series' secondary language, music. Before we go further, and because this comes up from time to time in the comments, I'm not suggesting Shinichirō Watanabe was working from a philosophy textbook, or Keiko Nobumoto was arranging bebop to line up with music theory. Great art often functions through intuition rather than instruction. Whether these structures were consciously planned or simply a byproduct of the show's jazz soul is secondary. What matters is the resonance. These frameworks give us a language to describe the aesthetic we all feel, but might have difficulty articulating. So while Watanabe and the crew likely didn't set out to structure the show like musical movements, its core artistic underpinnings create a distinct overlap. So, with that in mind. We can also understand our centripetal structure through a complementary lens that we'll call motivic storytelling. Borrowed from musical composition, a motive is a minimal thematic unit that returns across a work, not identically, but transformed by context, pressure, and emotional weight. In the same way a musical composition returns to motifs, repeats phrases with variation, and explores counterpoint and resonance, bebop storytelling revisits emotional beats, character dilemmas, and narrative echoes across multiple episodes. Recurring bounties, recurring dreams, mirrored versions of the crew. All of these are analogous to musical repetition, improvisation, and variation. They provide a lens for understanding how the series achieves structural coherence without relying on traditional linearity. The series develops its emotional core the way a composition develops a theme, through thematic accumulation. The gradual layering and returning of ideas until their meaning becomes unavoidable. While the show is synonymous with jazz, Yoko Kanno's score is far more expansive. Waltzes, blues, folk ballads, big band swing, elegiac strings, even pop-inflected lullabies. And bebop appropriately mirrors that eclecticism in its narrative structure. Instead of a linear plot, we get a sequence of movements. Each episode a session, each session a variation on the same underlying motifs: loss, drifting, reinvention, refusal, longing, denial. In musical terms, we could say bebop resembles a rondo. A rondo is organized around the repeated return of a principal theme or refrain, interrupted by contrasting sections, allowing recognition and variation to do the expressive work. Meaning emerges not from where the piece goes, but how the listener experiences the returns differently. Each return does not negate what came before, but absorbs it, allowing emotional and thematic meaning to accumulate over time. This provides us with a useful referent when thinking about thematic accumulation. In terms of bebop, we have our principal theme, the deferred dream. We also have our principal action, returning to the bebop for the next bounty. Each bounty is like a new musical section, with the episode providing a contrast. A different genre, a different tone, a different idiom. However, none of these episodes are random. We see variants or refractions of the same core: failure, loss, characters trapped by the past, and the tightening noose of consequence. While these don't advance an explicit central plot, they are recontextualizing the main theme, while also steadily accumulating, both in our framework and in the minds of our characters. These aren't just escalations in a plot sense, they're recurrences. The return of the same melodic theme. Each time, the same emotional material is repeated, but with new variation, new context, and new pressure. This pattern applies to the whole series. Spike has repeated run-ins with people who have death nipping at their heels, or whose dreams have cataclysmic consequences. Jet encounters men whose idealism was broken the same way his was. Faye crosses paths with people plagued by pathological nostalgia or chasing reinvention. Ed's episodes orbit abandonment, belonging, family, and reorientation. Bebop storytelling is fundamentally recursive. The characters keep running into versions of themselves. The show isn't building toward a single climactic revelation, it's tightening a circle. Each iteration brings the characters closer to the truth they've been avoiding. The structure is musical, not mechanical. Emotional, not expository. Each episode ends with a coda. See you, Space Cowboy. The next episode starts and we begin again with a new variation, but carrying new understanding and new emotional and thematic depth. Of course, a theoretical framework is only as good as its application. So, with the orbit established, our focus shifts from the shape of the path to the weight of the objects within it. If dream deferral is our central motif, then our bounty and bounty-adjacent characters are the debris field. A collection of individuals caught at the exact moment their own long games collapse. These aren't just obstacles, they're refractions. Each encounter takes a specific aspect of the crew's past or their conflicted modern-day persona and exposes it as a raw nerve. The Bebop doesn't just hunt criminals, it tracks variations of its own tragedy. We see it in the waltz with death, the desperate search for a home, and the stagnant silence of the betrayed. They're answers to the series' central question, providing the crew with a mirror they must look into. This recursive logic is most acute in Spike Spiegel, a man caught in a refrain he's been replaying since before the opening credits ever rolled. In music, the cantus firmus is the fixed theme around which the other melodic voices are orchestrated. Spike Spiegel, the face of Cowboy Bebop, is its most persistent melodic voice. His is a variation that returns to interrogate the same unresolved theme through its most dire lens. Unlike a traditional protagonist whose story unfolds through steady growth or revelation, Spike's arc is one of repetition and deepening resonance. He circles the fixed melody of the deferred dream, each rotation adding weight until the structure can no longer sustain its own mass. As a heads up, if for some reason you've made it this far and haven't watched Cowboy Bebop, there are spoilers ahead. The series establishes its pattern immediately with Asimov and Katerina in Asteroid Blues. Their flight from authority, fueled by a volatile mix of love and desperation, mirrors the life Spike and Julia almost chose, and one that Julia will ask Spike to choose again in the future. Within the logic of the show, the resemblance is too close to be accidental. Asimov and Katerina are a shade of the past and an omen. The parallel is, of course, nuanced. Asimov is aggressive and dangerous, even abusive to the woman he claims to love. But their fate is grim and unambiguous. Their dream of running away does not resolve into freedom, but total annihilation. It's difficult to imagine Spike failing to recognize this resonance. When he later refuses Julia's invitation to disappear together, it's not because of stubbornness or misguided fatalism, but because he's already seen, in this very first session, how that particular refrain ends. The second major variant comes in Sympathy for the Devil. Here, Spike encounters Wen, a child rendered immortal after an accident, trapped outside of time. Wen's condition externalizes what Spike has been living internally, a life suspended, unable to progress, defined entirely by a past moment that will not recede. In this context, immortality is not framed as power, but as paralysis. Wen exists in a perpetual present, cut off from both future and closure. He can never be his true self, existing as a phantom in the background, going intentionally unnoticed. When he finally dies, he tells Spike that he feels at ease and asks him if he understands.
Yes, I can finally die at last. I feel so heavy. But I finally feel at ease. Do you understand? Do you understand? Do you?
This moment is crucial. Death is not portrayed as a defeat, but as a release. Whether Wen is simply looking for affirmation or recognizes in Spike the same suspended existence, his question is diagnostic. He's identifying a fellow ghost. Spike answers in a sarcastic way, but the truth is that he does understand, even if he isn't ready to accept it yet.
Yeah, I understand. As if.
It's important that this episode follows his near-death encounter with Vicious in episode 5, continuing his cycle of escaping death. Sympathy for the Devil reveals a little of Spike's own backstory and begins the revelatory process of uncovering his own paralysis, before presenting us with an aggressive counterpoint in Wen. This episode is also called back to in Spike's descent down the stairs in the Real Folk Blues, with his iconic bang reminiscent of this encounter, as if acknowledging that he does properly understand now. The narrative weight takes a sudden shift with Roco in Waltz for Venus. Roco is rough-edged and stubborn, but for lack of a better word, also kind of a dork. Midway through, we realize Spike isn't merely mentoring a street thug. He's encountering a resonant reflection of himself. And if it wasn't enough for us to venture that guess on our own, Stella says as much outright.
Both you and Roco have something beautiful inside you. It's hard for most people to see it, but it's there. I know it is. That's why I'm sharing my tea with you.
However it may have started, Roco's current life of crime isn't glamour. It's a haphazard sacrifice in service of a dream, to get his sister's eyesight back. Recast in this way, Spike's mentorship of Roco takes on a new meaning. He's training a more naive and inexperienced version of himself, a man giving up everything for someone he loves, though perhaps one less steeped in violence. Likewise, Roco seems to be chasing after a version of himself as he might have been, begging Spike to teach him. Yet, when the time comes, Roco is not enough like Spike. He refuses to back down and joins the fray, recklessly plunging into combat to protect his new mentor, but lacks the necessary killer edge and awareness, paying the cost for fighting. As he dies, Roco seems to be aware of their similarities, pondering if they might have been friends had they met sooner.
I wonder if I had met you earlier in my lifetime. Do you think that we would have been friends?
Even without the explicit answer, we know that Spike and Roco are archetypically linked, and that this experience is resonant with the deaths before and to follow, which will mirror Spike's own decision to stay and fight despite the hopelessness in the real folk blues. To bring home their archetype overlap, we get solace in knowing Roco's death isn't wholly in vain. In fact, his meeting Spike allows him to succeed in the long run, as the beautiful thing that Stella felt in Spike is exposed. While anyone else might have run off with the seeds for the money, Spike finishes Roco's mission, paying for the treatment and handing over the seeds that could be used to cure her blindness. With Pierrot Le Fou, the pattern darkens into a grotesque inversion. Pierrot is a betrayed man, trapped in a perpetual nightmare, incapable of waking. Unlike most of Spike's adversaries, Pierrot completely overwhelms him, stripping away the illusion of invulnerability Spike often carries. Pierrot is what happens when the dream becomes inescapable and runs rampant, cascading into wanton violence. This encounter externalizes one of Spike's unspoken ruminations, not of death, but endless survival inside torment, a loop with no exit. Pierrot is not afraid to die because death never comes. He is condemned to repetition without resolution, just the madness of accumulated suffering over time. Further leaning on the idea of people trapped in the past, a part of what saves Spike from Pierrot is the latter's fear of cats, psychologically anchored in the experiments performed on him. Even the glint of Spike's eyes elicits a response as Pierrot views them as cat-like. Despite his terrifying power, Pierrot is a fractured man who lives in deeply rooted fear, lashing out. His battle with Spike culminates in a harrowing display, as Pierrot howls at the slightest pain, crying for his mother like a child, before literally being crushed beneath the nightmare. Once more, death appears as an act of mercy and release, in this instance, akin to putting down a sick animal. But we also have an insight into what happens when a dream, allowed to persist for too long, goes unaddressed. Andy, by contrast, represents the lightest variation on the theme. While many suggest he's a parody of the bounty hunter genre, this seems like an oversimplification of his practical application. His attempts at being a bounty hunter result in a parodical, theatrical version of Spike. Where Spike and the crew of the Bebop perform this job out of necessity, Andy is a rich kid playing a part and chasing after a fantasy. Crucially, however, Andy has a disposition Spike does not. He's able to abandon his dream and move on. Andy is the what might have been, the version of Spike that chose elasticity over fixation. Spike's irritation with Andy works beyond the surface conflict. On a meta level, Andy exposes that Spike's paralysis is, at least to some degree, a choice. He is the most authentic embodiment of Spike's whatever happens, happens mantra. Andy is also a fitting choice as a precursor to the dramatic conclusion of the series, suggesting that there is a more optimistic choice, if we want it. Though produced later, Vincent Volaju from Knockin' on Heaven's Door functions as Spike's most deliberate dark mirror. The overlap between the two, men whose lives are irreparably altered forever, who live in a space between dreaming and waking, is overtly stated.
All I'm trying to do is find the door.
The door?
I've been having a dream, and though I realize it's a dream, I still can't wake from it. Have you ever had such an experience?
But where Spike drifts through life, Vincent is committed to acting out. A version of Spike stripped of improvisation, humor, or honor. The confrontation with Vincent produces Spike's first truly mortal fear. As he admits to Laughing Bull, the fight with Vincent was the first time he felt afraid.
It was the first time. The first. That I was really scared. I shook with fear. If one thing, one atom had given way, then I would be gone.
This is a marked character shift. Only when confronted with the fully realized inverse of himself does Spike recognize the dire stakes of his own stasis. It also begins the greatest pressure of investigating the question, am I awake or just dreaming? Vincent's thematic resonance is visualized through the glowing butterflies, reminiscent of the Leicho, butterflies that in Japanese culture often serve as escorts for spirits or omens of the departed. They symbolize a liminal existence between life and death. As a result, they allude to Vincent, and by proxy Spike, being men who hover on death's threshold. This imagery also explicitly evokes Zhuangzi's butterfly dream, the uncertainty of whether one is a man dreaming of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming it as a man.
Tell me before this life of yours ends. Did I die on Titan long ago? Is this world just a dream that these butterflies are showing me? Are they part of the dream? Or are the butterflies real, and Titan just a nightmare that I can't wake up from? I can't tell.
Spike and Elektra ultimately foil Vincent, ending his spiraling stasis through death. As he passes, he experiences a final human clarity, recognizing that he once loved, and providing another variation on the star-crossed lovers motif. His death crystallizes the cost of lingering in limbo, and legitimizes Spike's subsequent choice to finally resolve his own melody. The series makes no secret of Spike's thematic entanglement with death and reckoning. One of its most persistent patterns finds Spike as the final witness present for another's dying breath, casting him as an unintentional psychopomp. Again and again, he stands with another at death's threshold, as they welcome or fear their end, resolve old wounds, lament lost time, or wonder what might have been. Each encounter closes a loop and resolves a dream. Spike becomes both escort and participant in this waltz with death, trading partners as he evades his own turn just a little longer. With each rotation across the dance floor, he draws nearer to an unavoidable conclusion. A new face, the same pain. A variation on a refrain that tightens until resolution with the past becomes the only possible outcome. The show also frames Spike as a modern Ronin, a wandering samurai without clan or master. His soul remains stubbornly resolute, even as he drifts with cool detachment through a world he refuses to fully inhabit, adhering to an ad hoc Bushido of his own making. This coding surfaces explicitly in Session 3, when Spike steps before a movie screen mid-dialogue. Only a true samurai can kill him like, now reads as, only a true samurai can kill him like Spike. The implication resonates beyond the scene. Only Spike, bearing this samurai imprint, can confront Vicious, who walks a parallel path of honor stripped of meaning. Spike's profession courts death deliberately. He throws himself into lethal conflicts, not out of recklessness alone, but as an extension of a philosophy articulated in the Hagakure. A real man does not think of victory or defeat. He plunges recklessly toward an irrational death. By doing this, you will awaken from your dreams. And Bushido is realized in the presence of death. This means choosing death whenever there is a choice between life and death. There is no other reasoning. Laughing Bull reinforces this stance when he tells Jet that Spike's guardian star will fall, then counsels Jet that one need not fear death.
His star is about to fall. I have dreamed it.
This is ridiculous. What am I doing here?
Do not fear death. Death is always at our side. When we show fear, it jumps at us faster than light. But if we do not show fear, it casts its eye upon us gently, and then guides us into infinity.
This reframes the line, "Whatever happens, happens." It's neither mere fatalism nor existential shrug. It's an acknowledgement and provocation. Spike, a man living as though already dead, implicitly accepts death's presence at his shoulder, while daring the universe to finish when it began. If he is killed, he was truly alive. If he survives, the question remains unresolved, and the refrain repeats. By the time Spike makes his final decision in The Real Folk Blues, it arrives not as character revelation, but as structural inevitability, the only resolution left within the form. Confronted by Faye, he articulates his condition with devastating clarity. He exists in a state of binocular trauma. Two mismatched eyes, one that sees the past, the other sees the present. This is the embodied logic of the motivic structure. A man living a half-life, watching a dream he cannot wake from. Spike has been spectator to his own tragedy played out in others, trapped in the friction between the fixed melody of his history and the chaotic syncopation of his present. But the finale changes the geometry. The two images overlap. The dream ends. The mismatched eyes finally focus on a single point: the reckoning. Spike is the most eminent example, but the same could be said of any of the characters in Cowboy Bebop. I won't belabor the point examining each, but you can find these recurrences throughout, and create thematic constellations around each of the characters and their encounters. Now, by way of a detour before our finale, perhaps this sounds just a little too neat so far. I can already hear some of you waiting to ask, wait, what about episodes like Toys in the Attic? How does this fit into your motivic centripetal jam session? It's a great question. On its surface, the episode seems like filler, almost willfully disconnected from Cowboy Bebop's larger concerns. A mutated Ganymede rock lobster, a long-forgotten refrigerator, and a creeping pastiche of Alien. What could something so absurd have to do with a story about loss, dreaming, and emotional paralysis? Well, a lot, actually. Toys in the Attic offers one of the series' clearest metaphors for its central obsession with deferred reckoning. Spike hides away a prized culinary treat with the intention of returning to it later, but ultimately fails to. A microcosmic embodiment of a dream deferred. But like so many things in Bebop that are left unexamined or deliberately forgotten, it does not remain dormant. Sealed off, neglected, and pushed into the background, it mutates. What was once a promise of pleasure returns as a threat, something alien and hostile. The dream does not simply fade, it curdles, and then runs. Presented as a tightrope act between comedy and horror, the episode nonetheless articulates one of Bebop's most persistent themes. The past does not stay where you leave it. Whether it takes the form of an old wound, a lost love, a betrayal, or even a forgotten meal, what is deferred waits. And when it resurfaces, it often does so on worse terms than before. This is not a moral lesson so much as a structural one. In Bebop, unresolved things return, again and again, until they are confronted or prove fatal. It's thematically appropriate that this episode precedes Spike's renewed confrontation with Vicious in Jupiter Jazz 1 and 2. Just as the creature in the refrigerator is something Spike left behind to his own detriment, Vicious is a part of Spike's life that resurfaces with lethal intent, and vice versa. Gren 2 embodies this same logic. Someone Vicious betrayed and left behind, only to return as a living consequence of that abandonment. Toys in the Attic is not a detour from the series' themes, but a grotesque rehearsal of them. A reminder that nothing truly disappears. It only waits. If we return to our musical structure, the final rotation is marked da capo al fine, from the beginning to the end. The refrain plays once more, but now weighted by every prior rotation. New context, new gravity, new perspective. Most importantly, no coda will follow. The series returns to its origin, the cemetery where Spike was once betrayed. His entire arc reprises. The long-delayed reunion with Julia, the attempt to flee, the conflict with the Red Dragon Syndicate, and the wrath of Vicious. Minor variations appear, but the outcome is inevitable. The dream collapses immediately. And while shocking, this comes without surprise. Like Spike, we've watched this thematic moment play out across 26 episodes. Julia's final words,
"It's all a dream."
Yeah. Just a dream.
is something Spike has already acknowledged. He's seen the pattern and internalized its logic. The past is not something you can run from forever. What is left unfinished demands to be resolved, which pulls the momentum of our centripetal narrative to its violent conclusion. To an Aristotelian mindset, Spike's assault on the Syndicate might be seen as tragedy or failure, a tactical defeat. But within Bebop's structure, victory and defeat are irrelevant metrics. By plunging recklessly toward an irrational death, Spike seeks not triumph, but structural rupture. The irrationality is the point. In a world defined by the gravity of the past and the recurrence of deferred dreams, the only way to awaken is to perform an act so final that the orbit can no longer sustain itself. Spike acknowledges this himself in his parable of the cat who lived 1,000 lives. Even he knows the refrain must end. He can't return to the Bebop, not because he lacks affection for its crew, but because that life was never his to keep. He has only been delaying the inevitable. And worse, the unresolved past spills over, threatening to hurt everyone around him as the circle tightens. Even if he could run, it would just put everyone at risk. The series has played the same melody from its opening notes, each iteration heavier, more constrained. When the refrain finally resolves, it's because Spike has made his choice, and the music can no longer repeat. The bang is not playful mimicry, it's the final cadence. The dreamer choosing to close the loop, end the dream, and finally awaken. Now, for the optimists who don't rule out Spike surviving this encounter, whether Spike lives in the biological sense is secondary to the structural truth of the finale. The bang is a period, not a question mark. The gravity that held him in orbit, the twin weights of Vicious and Julia, the unresolved dream, has been annihilated. The refrain is broken. The past is dead. The debt is settled. The song has reached its fine. If Spike lives beyond that staircase, he does so as a man finally freed from the nightmare of his own history. The dream has not merely ended, it's been resolved. Cowboy Bebop is a triumph of non-traditional narrative. It constructs a central conflict, only to orbit it, avoiding direct confrontation until the final moments. In doing so, it tells a story we must learn to understand, drawing on the mosaic of motives to finally hear the full song. The duels between Spike and Vicious occupy minimal screen time. The reunion with Julia unfolds in fleeting moments. Yet these encounters resonate with devastating force, not because of melodrama or explicit buildup, but because thematic accumulation has rehearsed their logic across 26 variations. This gravity extends beyond Spike to the entire crew, each orbiting their own deferred dream until the ellipse collapses into resolution. Faye's pursuit of her past culminates in an unsatisfying anticlimax. Not failure, but inevitability. The dream was already dead, and her journey merely confirmed its corpse. When she returns to the Bebop, it's to yet another fractured home. Jet loses a partner once more, yet this time, he does so graciously, no longer running from loss, but accepting it as ballast. Ed and Ein depart toward the possibility of home, carrying the weight of belonging rather than its absence. And none of them advance in any Aristotelian sense. They have been running in place, yet through the sheer accumulation of orbits, the recursive encounters, the mirrored wounds, the deaths witnessed, they are irrevocably transformed. The ellipse does not propel them forward, it compresses them inward, until what remains is not who they were, but who they have become under the weight of what they could not escape. Not every story needs to announce its stakes through obvious action. Some of the most enduring narratives creep in obliquely, offering space for reflection rather than explicit answers, inviting us to see our own struggles mirrored back. This is Bebop's enduring power. So, what happens to a dream deferred? Cowboy Bebop gives us a staging ground to watch it play out in various forms, accumulating until it becomes a crushing force. But ultimately, it's a question we have to answer for ourselves, eventually. Until then, all of this accumulation means